Our fourth learning moment lesson, we're going to be talking about the need that there often is to store additional information about our users, the authenticated users, right? So there could be employees in a business situation, and that's going to be our focus really is not so much on a case where anybody and everybody can come and register on the site, but the site is focused on a business application where the users are primarily employees and that type of thing. But, the identity system is good, but there's a limit to what information it stores. Besides, name and email, which normally by default are the same. All there really is in there is a phone number, and that's really just there for two-factor authentication, right? So anything else that we need to know, even nicely broken out first and last name, right? Things like that, we would actually have to add or incorporate ourselves. And there's often situations where there's quite a bit of additional information about the employees or users that we do need to track. Just to share with you, in my experience, quite often there might be additional, besides the actual roles in terms of security that a user might have, there might be different functions within a company, whether or not, they perhaps have got the certifications to be a project lead or, to whether they're authorized to move something into production and so on and so forth. So, there can be additional requirements that require, sometimes a many to many relationship to other entities from this, basically this account, right? So we're going to talk about different ways to approach that. I have a PowerPoint to introduce the concept. Some people would say this is a bit more advanced, but really it's not rocket science. No. Now, to be fair, I should point out, and I might slip up, in the past, I always referred to this as user profiles. But the truth is, the identity system now is talking about the term user profiles. So to avoid avoid confusion, I'm going to talk about it as like accounts or account details, right? Okay. So we often need more than just a login, password, and so on, right? So we're going to be talking about this. This is our discussion. Where are we going to store this information? We're going to look at advantages and disadvantages to consider with the different options there. We're also going to look at implementing something that would make it a bit easier for us to access certain information about the user, especially the currently logged in user, right? We don't want to have to go back to the database all the time if we can store certain common information. The example we're going to work with, quite frankly, is just the full name of the user, right? We don't want to have to go back to the database every time they go from one page to the next. We're going to keep that in a cookie. And the other issue that often comes up is if we're tracking information about the different employees and perhaps even auditing, what work they did, what records they've last edited, and so on. Well, if they leave the company, what do you do about that? Well, you don't want them to be able to keep logging in, right? So how do you kind of disable that login without losing all the information about the employee and the history of what they've done in the system, right? So we'll touch on that. So the first question is where, and there's really two main choices. We can take the identity system the way it is now, and we've touched on this before, that it's gone through a number of iterations and improvements over time, and they've designed the latest version to be very extensible. So we can add new properties and so on, and take that approach. The other obvious one is to have our own DB set of whatever class we want to call it for our user accounts and so on, and store this additional information in there, right? So let's talk about advantages and disadvantages. So the identity system, yes, it was designed so you can create your own application user. As long as it inherits from identity user, then you can use that class and add additional properties, whatever you need. I'm going to suggest that something really important at our medical office, some information about each user that is vital that we track, is what is their favorite ice cream. I mean, we have our big ice cream social every summer, and we just have to know what everybody's favorite ice cream is. That's critical information to know about each user, right? So we could store that actually with the identity user, okay, in our application user object, right? We can add as many custom properties as we need to store whatever is required, right? But just be aware then, you'll also have to do quite a bit of work to modify the system to use these new properties, right? Think about all the different whitelists that only let you change certain things. You'll have to add the properties to them. Input controls. There probably isn't in a text box yet to store my favorite ice cream information. And so you'll have to add that on various pages and be able to maintain it and so on, right? So there is a fair bit of work to be done. Main advantage of the identity, well, it's a complete system all in one place. Yeah, the extensibility was designed into it to be able to do this, right? So that's some good advantages there. Disadvantages, well, as I say, it actually can end up to be quite a bit of work. And the other thing is, you're working in somebody else's code. The identity system has been written by a team of developers, right? And you have to go in and be comfortable working in their code the way they've laid it out to make the changes you need, right? So there's a fair bit to it. And as I say here, it's really just not a trivial task. And the whole idea of sharing a common login across multiple apps, we talked about this, that you might keep your identity tables in a separate database, so that you can share that login easily with multiple apps that are all hosted on the same server type of thing. Well, the advantage then is great, but what if you have custom properties you've added for use in one application? Well, other applications sharing this common login, they have no use for those, right? But they might have their own unique custom properties they want added and so on, right? And the last thing I'll just kind of mention related to that is relationships to other entities. So if you did want to track, okay, certain employees have achieved certain certifications that are allowed to take on certain kinds of jobs, well then, you don't have a choice. If you're going to use the identity system, then it has to be in the same database, right? So you can add navigation properties and relate it strongly with these other uh, uh, entities as well. So, there's a few issues involved. Doing our own DB set, well, this can be made to work fairly in a fairly straightforward way. We don't have referential integrity between them, but think about it for a second. Each identity user, the system is designed, they must have, it's required that there's an email address and that email address is unique. All right, so that's a given. That's how the identity system works. So if we, in our own account model, right, if we go ahead and make a required email address field and force it to be unique, then we have a high confidence that we can relate back and forth between them, right? So it's actually pretty straightforward. Advantages, the account model, right, can hold whatever application specific custom properties we want. So I can store my favorite ice cream in there, as well as anything else that we might need, and we can add to it over time. Navigation properties can easily be added. So those relationships to other things like certifications and, job functions and things like that can all be incorporated into our model. And we're going to scaffold and maintain our own code. So it's not that I object to working inside other people's code, but sometimes it's nice to just have full control. So any changes you make, that you're not going to bump into something else somebody else has done. All right. And of course, our auditing could all be based on this account model, right? This new class that we create for our employees and to hold all their account details. And that addresses as well the situation that, somebody leaves the company, right? Well, we don't want them to be able to log in anymore. Truth is, there is no active or disabled property in the identity system for a user. Um, so this way we can just actually remove their account from the login system, and there's really no data loss in terms of what's happened in the production end of things, right? All the audit history is still there related back to the now disabled, okay, or inactive record. We can keep that as one of the properties in our own model. All right, so as we go through the demo, kind of watch for these things. I'm going to show you how to store additional information from the user account details in cookies so you don't have to hit the database over and over again. We're going to take some time to integrate this into the login system that's there so that if they haven't completed their account details, filled out their quote profile yet, right? Every time they log in, if it hasn't been done, they'll be directed to go and do so. It'll nag them into finally filling out that form and entering their full first and last name and so on, right? And we're going to basically also disable the login um, by deleting the identity user, right? This will allow us to keep all the history of what they've done in terms of any auditing and so on in place. And if they ever come back to the company, all we have to do is recreate their login account with the same email, and bada bing. Okay, it immediately relates back to all of the information we have about previous work done by the employee, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. In my footnote there, it mentions that identity user, as I said, doesn't have an active or disabled property. There is a locked out time limit, right? That's mainly there so that if you try 3 times to log in, or you can change that setting in a row, and you can't remember your password and you mess up, well then you have the option as the developer of setting a lockout, right? And say, oh, you can't try again for 30 minutes. That's to help prevent, those hacking applications that just try gazillions of passwords one after another, right? But the purpose of that locked out time limit is really just a temporary fix. That's not its intention, is to make this user disabled, for all time, right? Okay, so that's the end of our discussion. Now let's get into the code. I'm just going to stop and start recording.